Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books, out loud, while stoned. In this video, we're going to start a new Little Blue Book, and it is Little Blue Book number 1003, and it is titled, How to Think Logically, written by Leo Markin, and it is copyright 1926. So this is How to Think Logically according to 100 years ago. So, shall we begin? How to Think Logically, the beginnings of knowledge. When we say that a certain thing is true, precisely what do we mean? We have all had the experience of finding out that the statement which we fully believed yesterday has suddenly become a monstrous lie. However much we may be convinced that we are not fools, we have all done and spoken and thought foolish things, to our later chagrin. We should all be pleased, therefore, if we could be always certain of reasoning correctly. Indeed, we are wont to extol the merits of common sense or horse sense, but we know that this has its limitations. Dean Swift, to be sure, imagined a country where the horses are the intelligent rulers. But the government of the world in which we all live is entrusted to human beings whom we suppose to be thinkers, accurate reasoners. Whether or not this is actually so need not here concern us. The most intellectual men who have ever lived, let this be conceded at once, have been swayed by emotion and habit. Intuition, often considered a feminine attribute, is likely at times to give to male and female alike results as satisfactory as those obtained by formal reasoning. What we call intuition is in reality a sort of condensed and swift thinking. The philosophers mean by intuition immediate apprehension or cognition. This should not be confused with the intellectual shorthand, which we originally understand by the term. My object here is not philosophical, except incidentally. I think that most of my readers will be concerned rather with practical methods of detecting errors in their reasoning, and that of others than with the epistemological theories about the origin of knowledge. I believe that the study of logic is capable of increasing accuracy of thought. It might be argued that some persons who know little about formal psychology or logic nevertheless manage to think satisfactorily. Apparently, they possess an inborn ability to think quickly and accurately. The dull-witted, on the other hand, remain dull despite any learning they may acquire. Granting all this, I hold that logic, the formal method of or group of methods of organizing knowledge, is a discipline worthy of our attention, whether we consider ourselves primarily thinkers, dreamers, or doers. For logic is more than the method of philosophy, more than the method of mathematics, more than a set of rules for scientists. We need not be builders of philosophical systems to make use of logic. We need not be students of biology. As journeymen, as voters, as businessmen, as workers in the crafts or the professions, as housewives, as anglers or hunters, as safe blowers and vagabonds, and riders in the side poor Pullmans. In short, in all our labors and in all our recreations, we are constantly compelled to make judgments. Many times a day, we are required to make up our minds that one thing or the other is true or is preferable. The cook whose hash does not seem so palatable as usual racks her brain to discover what is wrong. The schoolboy who has sat down upon a tack also finds it necessary to call mental processes into play to find the offender. Simple and familiar acts of thought of this nature are fundamentally no different from the most complicated inductions of the astronomer or the mathematician. Fallacious reasoning is possible in the simplest cases. The cook and the schoolboy, by coming to careless conclusions, may make mistakes of serious consequence to them. Exact thinking, scientific thinking, if we may employ this term in a very broad sense, is of constant importance to us. There are two forms of reasoning, inductive and deductive. Inductive is reasoning from particular facts to general truths, from the part to the whole. Deduction is reasoning from the general to the particular, from the whole to a part. A geometric demonstration depends upon deductive reasoning. The discovery of a scientific law is achieved principally by means of induction. For many centuries, logic and deduction were synonymous. During the Middle Ages, formal logic was one of the chief subjects of study at the universities. The medieval method was to accept without question the teaching of certain ancient authors that the sun, the moon, the planets, and the stars revolve about the earth in a certain fashion, the Ptolemaic system. By means of the new method, the correct relationship was discovered. First, it was necessary to discard outworn authority. It must be kept in mind, however, that scientific method includes deduction as well as induction. After a broad general principle is discovered, it may help us to explain particular phenomena and also to make other inductive inferences. We discover facts in various ways. Ultimately, however, and here I speak dogmatically, not wishing to bring up the philosophical problem already hinted at, facts come to us by means of our own senses or the senses of other people. A fact is something as an event or quality which evidently is real. We differentiate facts from illusions and mistakes of various kinds. Thus, it is not a fact that Columbus discovered America in 1776, although schoolboys have sometimes thought so. It is a fact that they have made this statement on examination papers. No person now alive saw the landing of Columbus. Yet, we are agreed that his landing was a fact. Most of the facts to which we subscribe have come to us in indirect fashion. We recite the population of our town glibly enough, although we have not ourselves counted the inhabitants. We find accounts in the newspapers of strikes and accidents, and after-dinner speeches which are taking place or have taken place hundreds or thousands of miles away, and we are reasonably certain that we are reading facts. But all our knowledge of facts originates in the seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, tasting of some person or persons. Without our senses, we could have no knowledge of any kind. Even what we know at second hand, we have seen or heard, or, if we are blind, perhaps learned through our sense of touch. The idea that there is such a thing as innate knowledge, or knowledge independent of the senses, has not entirely been abandoned by the philosophers. There are still religious mystics, people who feel that they can understand the divinity and the true nature of his word by means of immediate insight, having no relation to ordinary reasoning or sensation. But most psychologists and most logicians of the present day are content to begin with sense impressions. It is obvious, however, that our sense frequently deceives us. When we are expecting to see a certain person or object, and a similar person or object appears within our field of vision, we frequently think that we are seeing that which we have been expecting. Moreover, our senses are limited in various ways. We cannot see that which is separated from us by an opaque object, or that which is far distant, or that which is at our blind spot. Some of us are conspicuously colorblind, and none of us can see colors outside the visible spectrum. We know that some animals can smell what human noses cannot detect, and hear what is beyond the range of human ears. Much of our knowledge is necessarily acquired not from the sense impressions of the moment, or from memories of the sense impressions we have ourselves experienced in the past, but from the testimony of others. We need not travel across the Atlantic to learn that there is an island near the European continent containing a small city named Stratford-on-Avon. Even if we were to visit this city, we could not see ourselves that a man named William Shakespeare was born there. We know many facts that took place before we were born, facts which have come to us by means of the written or spoken accounts provided by others. Of course, not all testimony is of equal value. Some of the criteria of criticism will presently be discussed. It is possible to make mistakes in perception, as we have seen. It is also possible to make mistakes in remembering and in using the testimony of others. It is very easy to make mistakes in forming inferences. To think correctly means to eliminate all these mistakes. It may at once be conceded that men are so constituted that the mistakes cannot entirely be eliminated. Our senses frequently deceive us. To some extent, we can make allowances for errors in perception. We know that distant objects appear smaller than if they were close to us, and that parallel lines appear to converge. We are always correcting and interpreting the data which our sense perceptions furnish us. The people with their eyes turned upon the same landscape do not see the same things. One may be myopic. One may be a more careful observer than the other. According to their previous experiences, the objects coming within their range of vision mean different things to them. An artist might see a beautiful sunset where a sailor sees indications of an approaching storm. We know that colors look different under an artificial light from the same colors by the light of the sun. We know that the cliffs and the skyscrapers upon which moving picture actors climb or from which they are dashed to bits may be mere models. We know that the heroic movie actor sometimes employs a double or a dummy for his more dangerous stunts. We know that the villain whom he shoots dead or flings into the river will presently appear before the casting director and be sent to commit further villainies. We have heard ventriloquists make meek-looking men sitting in the back row flirt with a crabbed spinster sitting next to them. We have seen magicians pull rabbits out of high hats and custard pies out of small boys' pockets. But our senses often deceive us when no person is trying to confuse us. When under the influence of intoxicants or narcotics, we may behold what never was on land or sea. When we are tired, excited, ill, things appear to us in a different guise from what they would if we were in a normal state. In our dreams and reveries, we see objects and persons that our critical waking brains tell us could not have appeared before our eyes. One man or woman is often mistaken for another of similar figure and complexion. Even well-trained individuals, as police detectives, find it necessary to depend upon exact measurements and fingerprints for purposes of identification. Bacon remarks on the Novum Organum that by far the greatest impediment and aberration of the human understanding proceeds from the dullness, incompetency, and errors of the senses. We use telescopes, microscopes, micrometers, and other meters and instruments to correct the impressions of our own senses to enable us to grasp relationships and perform tasks difficult or impossible with the aid of our senses alone. Thus, science has an enormous advantage over common sense in the very outset. But even in the use of scientific instruments, physiological and psychological errors frequently lead the observer astray. Lights and sounds are not perceived instantly, nor do they cease to exert their efforts upon our nerves until some little time after they have actually ceased to be transmitted. This is the reason why the magician and the spiritualist are able to impose upon us. It is the reason why still pictures projected in quick succession upon a screen appear to us to move. We do not see and hear everything which is physiologically possible that we should perceive. To a certain extent, we are all absent minded, and if our interest is concentrated upon one thing, we may fail to notice something else just as bright or just as loud. A person who is much absorbed in the subject matter of a book which absorbs his interest is unlikely to notice minor typographical mistakes. The proofreader, who is not particularly interested in the book, but is thinking of the turkey he is presently to eat or the girl he is soon to flirt with, may also fail to see that a word is misspelled or a line of type has fallen out. Our memory is no more trustworthy than our senses. We do not remember all that we have perceived. Some impressions appear to have gone forever out of our mind. Others are only coaxed out with difficulty from secret hiding places. Even when we believe that we remember the fact correctly, we are often mistaken. The telephone number which we remember as South 6487 may turn out to be Maine 4768. We may be certain that the house we visited last year is gray, although it has always been brown. People picture the past as they would have liked to have it, or as it seems natural that it should have been. They forget those events which are comparatively unimpressive, but remember the past as a series of exciting events. They may suppose that they have personal memories of things which have been often described to them. Many memories of early childhood are of these nature. Men who frequently repeat the same lie come at last to believe it themselves, to confuse it with their proper memories. Many faulty memories result with defective sense perceptions. Since perception and memory are liable to error in so many ways, it is not surprising that much testimony should be erroneous. However, even if a witness should have perceived and remembered correctly, his testimony may be faulty. He may fail to convey his thoughts to us accurately. Perhaps his knowledge of the language is faulty, or he may have reason to lead us astray. Of course, there is much lying every day in and out of the courts of law. Nor does the fact that the testimony appears in print offer any guarantee as to its faith. Even the author's name attached to a piece of writing may be intended to mislead. We know that the legal name of the person whose works are signed Mark Twain was Samuel Clemens. We know that the authors who signed their books George Eliot and George Sand were women. We are not certain that every novel or collection of verses advertised as having been written by a child aged 6 is actually the work of a prodigy. Many works have been attributed to Shakespeare, Voltaire, Bacon, Paul, Chaucer, and Moses, with which they certainly had nothing to do. In dealing with written documents, it becomes still more necessary to examine them with a critical eye. The bank teller is not satisfied with the mere fact that a check purports to be signed by John Jones. He must be convinced that the signature is actually that of Mr. Jones. For it is hardly necessary to explain. It might be to the interest of Paul Brown or Richard Roe to write John Jones upon a slip of paper with fraudulent intent. Literary works and historical documents are sometimes manufactured in precisely this fashion. Just as one might take a check actually written by John Jones and amend it by adding 1,000 or 3 zeros to it, so certain copyists and editors have taken authentic writings of various kinds and altered them for their own purpose. How many men and women would now like to strike out with the Bible all favorable references to wine? It would be difficult now, but in ancient times the various writings which made up the Bible were actually changed about by the scribes. If the literature Christians of the first century had been prohibitionist, then Christ would not, at least so far as we are concerned, have attended a wedding feast at Cana and there changed water into wine. It is reasonably certain that the passage in the Antiquities of Flavius Josephus referring to Jesus was inserted by Christian copyists, very likely as a substitute for what Josephus actually wrote. The final portion of the Good Tidings, according to Mark, dealing with the appearance of Jesus before Mary Magdalene and the 11 disciples, was written later than the body of the work. In the words of Tertullian, that is to be believed which is foolish. It is certain because it is impossible. The view of the logic of faith has been antagonistic not alone to science, but also to all critical theology. But the higher critics have rejected Tertullian's test and have been subjecting the Bible to a more or less rationalistic inquiry. For example, they have been comparing the historical testimony of the Bible with the testimony supplied by ancient inscriptions and remains recently discovered. The advocate, it should be borne in mind, presents only that testimony which favors his cause. The historian, according to present notions of propriety, is supposed only to seek and present the truth. However, it is impossible for the writer of history to escape altogether from his prejudices. If he is a Catholic, he respects the traditions and the heroes of his faith. If he is a patriotic American, he is anxious to prove that the United States has always been just in its dealings with foreign countries. Should he by any chance fail in some manner to show this sort of egotistic narrowness, he is immediately denounced as a traitor and a corrupter of the young. But it is unlikely that he should refrain from revealing some sort of bias. Most of us learn our history not from a critical examination of ruins and diaries and state papers, but from books written by the investigators or by the popularizers. We must remember to be on our guard against the motives leading the historian away from the narrow path leading to truth. But even an unbiased historian would make mistakes. Let us suppose that he has come upon an inscription dated 1,000 years ago, contradicting in certain respects the accepted version of an important event which then occurred. It is his business first to determine whether or not the inscription can possibly be so old. A geologist may be able to inform him how long ago a given tablet was covered over with earth. A philologist may be called in to testify if the language the inscription is in the same that which was written 1,000 years ago. But even though a writing is as ancient as it purports to be, it may not tell the truth. Moreover, we must often grope about for the precise meaning of a piece of testimony. It may be exceedingly difficult to interpret an inscription written upon faded papyrus or crumbling clay in an obsolete tongue. It may be still more difficult to determine who wrote the inscription and who caused it to be erected. As to the truth of the testimony, sometimes we may check the facts indicated by means of other inscriptions or remains, but this is not always possible. Certain of the reasons for untruthful testimony are obvious enough. The boy says that he did not cut down the cherry tree because he fears for the skin of his fundament. Or he may untruthfully confess that he has cut down a tree in order to feel himself absorb some of the glory of George Washington. The man declares that his wife's diamonds are worth $50,000 because it flatters his vanity or is beneficial to his financial credit to have this believed. People lie to save their lives, to preserve themselves from disgrace, to defend their friends, or merely for the pleasure of lying. But deliberate lying is not the most common cause of erroneous testimony. Mistaken perception and memory are more important. A story transmitted from generation to generation by word of mouth becomes gradually changed, usually becoming more marvelous with each retelling. Heresy evidence is seldom trustworthy. Oh, I'm sorry. Hearsay evidence is seldom trustworthy. And that's the end of the first chapter. And I think that's where we'll stop for the first part of Little Blue Book number 1003, titled How to Think Logically, written by Leo Markin, copyright 1926, 100 years ago. So thanks for listening and joining me in part 2.